Okay, welcome back to the Einstein Forum Conference, Other People's Fascisms. Up next is Richard Wolin, professor of history and political science and comparative literature, and also somebody who I think has been well ahead of the curve in studying the pool of fascist ideas on European thinkers from both the right and the left. So join me in welcoming him to the Einstein Forum today.
Hello. Thank you very much, Dominic, for your words of introduction, and an additional brief thanks to Susan Naiman and Benjamin Zachariah for extending the kind invitation to come to Berlin and speak. It's about exactly 20 years after that.
No, seriously?
I think it was 2005. I was teaching in France at the time. How time flies.
You were here later than that.
Maybe.
Quite.
In spirit. I will make one disclaimer at the outset that has to do with the first image I'll be showing of several. I'm making no claims to subtlety in the course of this presentation, which I think suits the theme or topic of the presentation, but I'll let you judge. And at the outset especially, I actually don't really know the extent to which this discourse of kind of right-wing masculinity, which is really the starting point. I've changed my focus in the last, significantly, actually in the last 6 weeks, not happily, but significantly, to match the subtitle, The Quest for Red Caesar. So I'm really uncertain. I try to get up to snuff in terms of the extent to which this discourse is familiar in German Öffentlichkeit or even internet publicity. And I didn't find much, so I hope it's enlightening to you. But let me just kind of get right to the point, or the initial point. To judge by current trends in the white nationalist manosphere, that's actually a thing. That bears elaboration. There are essays on it because it's distinct, but you'll have to deduce it kind of empirically or phenomenologically. To judge by these trends, toxic masculinity, as once apotheosized by Junger's War's Inner Experience or Ernst von Salomon's Die Geächtete, is back in fashion. Its leading champion is Costin Vlad Alamariu, aka Bronze Age pervert, a Romanian-American trained in Straussian political philosophy at Yale University. Among incels and neo-reactionaries, Alamariu skyrocketed to fame in 2018. Curtis Yarvin, a self-described techno-fascist and a leading champion of dark enlightenment, a term I'll get back to in a minute, was an early vociferous advocate. With Alamariu skyrocketed to fame with Bronze Age mindset, a self-published, grammatically challenged paean to the bloodlust and inhumanity of pre-Socratic Heldentum, as filtered through the lens of Nietzsche. Is that enough? It just gets better or worse depending on where you're standing or sitting. Alamariu's understanding of modernity as an age of unremitting and precipitous decline is derived from the classic texts of the conservative revolution. Kann sehr gut Deutsch, tatsächlich. Oswald Spengler's Untergang des Abendlandes, Arthur Müller-Vandenbruck's Das Dritte Reich, and Carl Schmitt's Parlamentarismus-Schrift. Since its inception during the late 1960s, the New Right, or Nouvelle Droite, in its various national incarnations, Nouvelle Droite in France, where it sort of began, Neue Rechte here in German, Nuova Destra in Italy, has argued that the most effective way to wrest cultural hegemony away from the left was to rehabilitate the ideology of the conservative revolution. Accordingly, Bronze Age mindset often reads like a rewrite of Decline of the West, a version appropriate to an age of Instagram, 4chan, Telegram, TikTok, a post-apocalyptic reprise of Louis-Ferdinand Céline's Voyage au bout de la nuit, albeit devoid of aesthetic aspirations. Alamariu portrays modern urban life as an alembic of iniquity, a seamless network of, and I quote here, network of brothels, gambling houses, a complete penetration of the world of vice. He brusquely condemns democracy as a cover for the ascent of the human blob, of the lower orders of spirit, which is delivering the West into a condition of domestic brokenness and servility. According to Alamariu, contemporary society is best described as a process of cultural devolution, in which the remaining inhabitants, as in Kafka's Die Verwandlung, have for the most part been reduced to the status of vermin or Ungeziefer. In keeping for a minute with the Kafka analogy, Alamariu, drawing on the language of entomology, not etymology, which is what spell check made it into, denigrates, as if there weren't enough to worry about, right? Alamariu denigrates so-called normies, late modern incarnations of Nietzsche's letzter Mensch, as bug men who, and I quote, bury beauty under a morass of ubiquitous ugliness and garbage. It's only getting uglier, Alamariu continues, with the crowded, unhygienic cities of our age populated by hordes of dwarf-like zombies that are imported for slave labor from the fly-swept latrines of the third world. A remark that seemed to anticipate Trump's infamous characterization of the developing world as a bastion of, to speak bluntly, shithole countries. There's a wavelength that's being shared here, and that's largely where I'm going to go with this. Alamariu's obsession, you might think, why not just ignore this? Which is what I thought at first, but it's become increasingly difficult. Alamariu's obsession with hygiene recalls National Socialism's, and I don't mean this hyperbolically, recalls National Socialism's emphasis on Erbe und Rassenpflege. He regards the so-called bugmen, who are devoid of a raison d'etre and interfere with the flourishing of freie Geister, such as Alamariu, presumably. He regards the bugmen as lebensunwürdiges Leben. As such, they deserve to perish. Hence his disturbing conclusion, we must declare war on all mankind, especially on the bug creature, who is bored and wants to make the world a surveilled, padded, nursing madhouse. Alamariu regards the Männerbund, literally Männerbund, as immortalized in the Freikorps literature of Soldatennationalismus as the Platonic form of the warrior ethos. Every great thing in the past, claims Alamariu, was done through friendships between men, or brotherhoods of men, and this includes all political things. I believe in fascism, or something worse. I'm not sure what could be worse. Or something worse, he continues. I believe in rule by a military caste of men, men who would be able to guide society to a morality of eugenics. Thus, it should come as no surprise that in 2022, Alamariu published a Nietzsche-inspired sequel to Bronze Age Pervert, which I haven't put up on the board yet. This is the cover, it's self-published. The sequel is entitled Selective Breeding and the Birth of Philosophy. It has a kind of a Peter Sloterdijk reading, yeah? Schloss Elmau. Alamaria's hypertrophic misogyny is merely the flip side of his obsessional glorification of hypermasculinity. In Bronze Age mindset, Alamariu claimed that with the liberation of women, the West has given itself an infection, the language of virology, an infection from which it can't recover without the most terrible convulsions and the most thorough purgative measures. The liberation of women makes democracy into, I'm still quoting, a terminal disease, one that doesn't just end a particular government, but a civilization. You get a lot of points for hyperbole, clearly, on the internet. It's something that is worth exploring linguistically and discursively, but there's so much to deal with. Alamariu's visceral misogyny, a regressive comportment that is omnipresent in the manosphere, seems to have anticipated the Trump administration's pro-natalist fantasies, $5,000 baby bonuses, and mandatory menstrual cycle classes for women. I'm not making this up, right? This was floated last spring. As Emma Waters, a policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, remarked in April, we need to channel the MAGA, or in this case MAHA, reference to Robert F. Kennedy, Make America Healthy Again, whatever that is, the MAHA spirit, and really dive deep into infertility. Tucker Carlson, who appeared this morning briefly in a video, here he is again, Tucker Carlson's documentary film exploration of manliness in crisis, called The End of Men, from 2022, shows that Alamariu's discourse of aggrieved cisgender ressentiment has penetrated, I have the word in quotes, the citadels of mainstream American conservatism. Already during the 1990s, talk radio agitator Rush Limbaugh's incessant tirades against feminazis set the stage for the contemporary explosion of right-wing misogyny. In 2019, Alamariu's sophomoric harangue rose to the number 3 position on Amazon's Ancient Greek history rankings, whatever they mean, I'm not sure. Reportedly, numerous copies were downloaded and shared by testosterone-addled White House junior staffers. The testosterone-addled is my editorial gloss. Alamariu's treatise was promoted by Michael Anton, currently the State Department's Deputy Chief of Policy Planning. There's a long story there, and I'm just going to tell a little bit of it. Michael Anton, his name will reappear. He's been the most vociferous advocate in the last few years of this trope of a red Caesar to save us from the plague of liberal democracy and liberals. It was promoted by Michael Anton in the Claremont Review, the holy grail of West Coast Straussianism. Harvard University political philosopher Harvey Mansfield, the doyen of East Coast Straussianism and one of Alamariu's dissertation supervisors, lionized Alamariu's dissertation on selective breeding and the birth of philosophy as being full of sparks and fire, which you could tell by not reading it, just by looking at the cover, right? There's a volcano. Tech billionaire and right-wing political kingmaker Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel, has admitted that he finds Bronze Age pervert solutions to modern problems tempting. There's content behind that too, but referring to toxic masculinity, but we'll leave it where it lies for the moment. J.D. Vance, the MAGA movement's designated heir apparent, is one of Alamario's followers on X, formerly known as Twitter. Vance's misogynist slur, which resurfaced during the 2024 presidential campaign, that America was being run by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too, is of a piece with Alamario's deep-seated anti-feminist paranoia. You first start reading about this and you think this is quaint, or these are a series of accidents, and then you see it cohering into a coherent, incoherent paradigm, in fact, ideological paradigm. Among far-right intellectual rabble-rousers, fantasies of extermination seem widespread. I'm recurring to Alamario's discussion of the bugmen. For example, in a 2008 thought experiment, Curtis Yarvin, Alamario's neo-reactionary doppelganger, proposed converting non-productive people into biodiesel fuel to help power city buses, which I guess was a problem in San Francisco, in the Bay Area at the time. Certainly got attention for this kind of transgression. When challenged by critics, Yarvin, clearly relishing the provocation effect of his utterance, mildly backtracked. Although, in the same breath, he reaffirmed his commitment to formulating, as he framed it, a humane alternative to genocide. Yarvin's humane solution, you'll be pleased to know, would be to virtualize members of the underclass, I'm quoting, imprisoning them in a permanent solitary confinement where they would be connected to an immersive virtual reality interface, thereby ensuring that they could experience rich, fulfilling life in a completely imaginary world. End of quote. And this is the person, as you'll see. This is the cover story from the New Yorker's June issue. Curtis Yarvin's Plot Against America, who's treated as the new intellectual eminence and source of the Trump administration's ideas. Since Trump's re-election last November, Yarvin's notoriety has skyrocketed. He has been the subject of numerous reverential profiles in respectable organs of so-called legacy journalism. The New York Times, the New Yorker, Politico, and there are others. As one of the leading spokespersons for the authoritarian current known as neo-reaction, Yarvin, channeling Nietzsche and Spengler, has long argued that Western democracy is an abysmal failure. If Americans want to change their government, claims Yarvin, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. And we're getting nearer and nearer to the search for a Red Caesar. The net effect of Yarvin's newly acquired cultural celebrity has been the worrisome mainstreaming of anti-democratic and intolerant hard-right political views. One more Curtis Yarvin image. Somehow this is fitting. The masses are asses. This, I guess, derives from some of his biofuel, humane genocide conceptions. There's really a need here to combine, I'm old school, I'm almost 19th century, but trained in the 20th century, and you have to really acclimatize yourself to an entire new aspect of discourse. Of course, there are plenty of studies on this, but sometimes they succumb to the phenomenon they're criticizing, of what kind of memes get floated on the internet. And this is an important part of my presentation, and I'm not sure I can do justice to it because it's very amorphous. And as soon as you try to, so to speak, sink your teeth into it or elevate it to the level of a begriff, it just collapses under your grasp, as it were. Now I'm segueing to a discussion of this important term on the manosphere and the far right, dark enlightenment. Both Alamariu and Yarvin are representatives of so-called dark enlightenment, a right-wing, Foucault-inflected rewrite of dialectic der Aufklärung that is suffused, again, with neo-Spenglerian Kulturpessimismus. However, unlike Horkheimer and Adorno, proponents of dark enlightenment do not argue that enlightenment ideals require a course correction or readjustment to realize their true emancipatory potential. Instead, following Nietzsche, they contend that enlightened universalism was, from the very beginning, nihilistic. As Zivilisationskritiker, Alamariu and Yarvin take the Enlightenment narrative of progress and stand it on its head. As accelerationists, a term that hopefully is self-evident from the context, maybe it isn't, but I have to leave it at that. As accelerationists, they maintain that the debilities of political liberalism have become so egregious that a point of no return has been reached. Consequently, its shortcomings, political liberalism's shortcomings, can no longer be ameliorated by way of piecemeal reforms or minor adjustments. Instead, qualitative change will only result from an all-or-nothing approach, a politique du pire that culminates in the total collapse of the bourgeois order, or civic order. Accordingly, Alamariu and Yarvin subscribe to what one might call an inverted Hegelianism. Disavowing Hegel's understanding of history as progress in the consciousness of freedom, they portray the civilizing process as a Befallsgeschichte, a story of unremitting catastrophe and decline. Since the historical present is viewed as an era of total perdition, every transgression or disruption that might hasten its abolition, no matter how violent or extreme, would seem to be not only justified, but actively encouraged. This argument culminates, predictably, in the diagnostic trope of soft totalitarianism. As Alamariu contends in Bronze Age mindset, the state we live in is as repressive as any Oriental tyranny. I'm not even going to bother to comment on the Orientalist aspects of that. Its hypocrisy is that it hides its force under the delusion of egalitarian ideals and legalistic procedures. Yarvin's term for the seamless institutional hegemony of liberal elites is the cathedral, which has become, I think, more and more well known in the last 8 months. The cathedral, claims Yarvin, performs the function that a ministry of truth would perform in a classic Orwellian environment, and it's performing the functions that a religion would in a classic theocracy. The historical allusions are almost always superficial and wrong-headed, but that doesn't seem to bother anyone. Like so much hard-right discourse, Yarvin's discussion of the cathedral is long on polemic and invective. When it comes to concrete political analysis, there's really nothing there, except for almost epithets. Yarvin's claim that the cathedral performs the ideological functions that a religion would in a classic theocracy is a central component of neo-reaction's campaign to discredit liberal democracy. It's very Schmittian, right? It's political theology. Liberalism claims to be about secularism, immanent concepts, etc., but it's really parasitical on previous theological categories. The centerpiece of this campaign is a conspiracy theory suggesting that although liberalism presents itself as a secular political credo that favors pluralism and tolerance, such claims are in reality an illusion or appearance that masks the will to power of ruthless left-wing elites who control the cathedral and its institutions from behind the scenes. The soft totalitarian matrix thesis explains neo-reaction's fascination with the 1999 Hollywood blockbuster The Matrix, which figures like Alamario and Yarvin treat as a parable or origin story about their movement and the nature of dark enlightenment. And I assume I don't have to dive into the particulars of red pilling versus blue pilling, etc. But it has this particular valence in right-wing internet culture among this milieu that's important. Among acolytes of the hard right, to be red-pilled means that one has penetrated the veil of illusion, or to borrow from Adorno for a second, the Verblendungszusammenhang, fabricated by the institutions of political liberalism. Having seen the light, those who have been red-pilled undergo a conversion experience, as in the film. Liberated from the pseudo-reality of the cathedral, they are reborn as alternative right militants and are encouraged to transgress a plethora of liberal conventions about race, so-called gender ideology, immigration, and so forth. I mean, Trump does this without even having to, he's proud, he's never read books, he's proud of that, he's announced that. I mean, he gets it all kind of intuitively, but there's an internet discourse that supports this worldview. One indication, it goes under the name of red pill ideology and even has initials to go along with it, RPI, who knew? One indication of the extent to which red pill ideology has penetrated the upper echelons of the Republican Party establishment is J.D. Vance's response to an interviewer's query about his abrupt shift, circa 2019, from a Trump critic to a MAGA loyalist. "I was red-pilled," said Vance laconically. Nevertheless, Vance's avowal demonstrates that this neo-reactionary discourse is no longer confined to the political margins. Instead, among Trump's inner circle of advisors, in fact, the person who is next in line, I'm not paranoid, but there are people who are really out to get me, I'll just say that. Among Trump's inner circle of advisors, such rhetoric has become a kind of new lingua franca. One of the primary reasons for the surfeit of attention that Yarvin has garnered concerns his role as an intellectual intimate and mentor to sitting Vice President J.D. Vance. Quick anecdote, according to Yarvin, when the two men crossed paths at Trump's coronation ball last January, Vance greeted him with, "Yarvin, you reactionary fascist," which Yarvin said he viewed as a compliment. In a 2021 podcast interview, Vance unhesitatingly acknowledged Yarvin's influence. In fact, there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things. One has to basically accept that the whole of American democracy is going to fall in on itself. And Vance is really helping the acceleration of the fall. In an October 2024 article in The Verge, the publication reported that no one online has shaped Vance's thinking more than Yarvin. Later in the same podcast, Vance became even more explicit about the strong arm tactics that would be, this is going back to 2021, that would be needed in light of the current liberal Ausnahmezustand under Biden to permanently expel liberals from government, methods that recurred to Yarvin's assertion that for real change to occur, Americans would have to overcome their dictator phobia. Now I'm quoting Vance from the same podcast. "I think that we should seize the institutions of the left," this is before he's even a senator, "and turn them against the left. We need denazification, de-Baathification program, a de-wokification program." Anticipating a Trump victory in 2024, Vance asserted, "I think that what Trump should do, if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single middle-level bureaucrat, civil servant in the administration, in the administrative state, replace them with our people." End of quote. And with these words, of course, Vance anticipated the massive purge of federal employees envisioned by Project 2025 and carried out by Doge Elon Musk's infamous chainsaw-wielding wrecking crew. At the same time, in October 2012, in a podcast entitled "How to Reboot the U.S. Government," as if it were a question of just plugging in a new USB drive or something and changing the OS, Curtis Yarvin announced his own plan under the acronym RAGE, Retire All Government Employees. Both Yarvin and Vance are protégés of Silicon Valley billionaire and Republican Party megadonor Peter Thiel. Thiel's Founders Fund was a major investor in Yarvin's Silicon Valley startup, Plum. Vance has attributed his political awakening. This is from an article about a year ago in Die Zeit, Silicon Machiavel, and this is Vance, Peter Thiel, and I think that's Yarvin in the middle. The Dark Knight. Thiel's Founders Fund was a major investor in Yarvin's startup. Vance has attributed his political awakening to a talk that Thiel presented at the Federalist Society, a conservative legal group at Yale, where Vance studied law in 2011. After graduating from Yale Law, Vance became managing director at Mithril Capital Management, an investment banking firm that Thiel co-founded in 2012. In 2022, as is well known, Thiel contributed $50 million to J.D. Vance's successful Ohio Senate campaign, and in spring 2024, Thiel's support for Vance was crucial in convincing Trump to name him as his running mate. Now I'm going to pursue a Peter Thiel subtopic, but for that reason no less significant. While en route to becoming a multi-billionaire and major Republican Party benefactor, Thiel developed his own political philosophy, essentially a fusion of the French theorist of political theology and sacrificed René Girard, Leo Strauss, and Carl Schmitt, which he adumbrated in an essay from 2007, published in 2007, called The Straussian Moment, which was written shortly after September 11th, 2001. Thiel perceived the attacks of the terror attacks of September 11th through the lens of Schmitt's concept of the Ausnahmezustand. Hence, he interpreted them as a warrant for extreme, extra-legal countermeasures. Thiel argued that the post-September 11 world had metamorphosed into a clash of civilizations, pitting Islam against the West, against the Christian West, I should say. He also regarded the September 11th attacks as a Zivilisationsbruch, meaning that, according to Thiel, the West's hesitant and disunified response exposed the bankruptcy of Enlightenment ideals. Verbatim. At this point, the Straussian dimension of Thiel's worldview began to play a paramount role. It is an aspect that merits closer scrutiny insofar, as I hinted a while back, the West Coast Straussians, from their base at the Claremont Institute in Southern California, have been instrumental in catalyzing support for the MAGA movement among America's conservative establishment. And I have a couple of examples that are important. They go back to a famous essay by Michael Anton, now Chief of Policy Planning in the State Department. This famous essay he wrote in 2016 called The Flight 93 Election, an Illusion, to 9/11 and saying, basically arguing that it's a state of emergency, the choice between Hillary Clinton and Trump. But we'll see how that works. And of course, another aspect of the Claremont Institute that's significant for our political purposes is that one of the architects of Trump's Stop the Steal efforts in December 2020 and in January 2021 was John Eastman, who is on the advisory board of the Claremont Institute. Drawing on Strauss's critique of modernity, Thiel claimed that the Western Alliance's feeble response to the threat of Islamic fundamentalism was attributable to a dearth of manliness, the atrophy of thumos, which the ancient Greeks viewed as the spirited part of the soul. So there are some continuities here from my starting point with Alemario. And here one can readily see, where Thiel's concerns intersect with, obviously, Alemario, but also Harvey Mansfield, who is in his early 90s now, as I said before, the doyen of East Coast Straussianism. Consequently, in the modern world, Aristotle's megalosoukia, or great-souled individual, has been supplanted by, in the Straussian analysis, by the paltry concerns of Homo economicus, small-minded individuals, basically Alemario's bugmen, who busy themselves with pedestrian concerns of utility, security, pleasure, and mind-numbing consumerism. Thiel's attempt to reconcile the views of Strauss and Schmitt may seem strained. However, when it came to embracing Machiavellian means to achieve political ends, Strauss and Schmitt shared common ground. In view of Strauss's powerful influence on post-war American conservatism, going back to the Iraq War, at least, it is worth taking a closer look at Thiel's endorsement of Strauss's so-called pragmatic Machiavellianism. One of the reasons that Thiel's arguments in the Straussian moment are important is that they anticipate the American right's quest for a Red Caesar, a 21st century Hercules capable of cleansing the Augean stables of political liberalism. Following Plato, Strauss's political philosophy distinguished between esoteric, numinal truths, which only a spiritual elect can access, from exoteric truths which circulate among the hoi polloi, people like me, I guess. Of course, the locus classicus is the cave allegory in the Republic. In keeping with Plato's doctrine of philosopher kings, Strauss held that the cognoscenti, a spiritual aristocracy, should rule. However, in Persecution and the Art of Writing, he acknowledged that the knowledge gap between the philosophical elect and the masses, enthralled to the mystifications of opinion, created a potentially dangerous situation for philosophers, since at any moment the incomprehension of the hoi polloi threatened to turn on the philosopher king, as happened with Plato at Circus, immolating them in its fury. Strauss invoked this argument to justify the practice of esoteric writing, but he also employed it to legitimate the technique of political deception in the subaltern sphere of day-to-day politics, just as Plato had done in Book 3 of the Republic with his endorsement of the noble lie and the myth of the metals. Thiel acknowledged that Schmidt's political thought, which stressed the paramountcy of the Ausnahmezustand and redefined the political in terms of the capacity to distinguish between friends and enemies, was eminently suitable for transcending the weakness and indecision of political liberalism. However, in solidarity with the West Coast Straussians, Thiel also countenanced Strauss's willingness to suspend principle when questions of political self-preservation arose. Accordingly, Thiel, in the essay I've been referring to, The Straussian Moment, approvingly cited Strauss's claim in Thoughts on Machiavelli from 1958 that, and I quote, America owes her greatness not only to her adherence to the principles of freedom and justice, but also to her occasional deviation from them. There cannot be a great and glorious society without the equivalent of the murder of Remus by his brother Romulus. That's how we become Romans, neo-Romans. End of quote. Thiel recognized that constitutional constraints prevented an American republic in crisis from engaging in the brazen duplicity that Plato had proposed in Book 3 of the Republic. Nevertheless, quoting the Italian writer Roberto Colosso, Thiel insisted, and I quote, that there are more possibilities for action that first appear. And what might that action be? Secret societies, murders, traps, betrayals, assassinations, cover-ups, and weapons shipments. End of quote. And there's a quote within the quote from Colosso. Alluding to the Schmittian Ausnahmezustand, Thiel claimed that the decisive path to a true, I'm quoting, decisive path to a truly global Pax Americana, preceded by a Pax Romana, presumably, it requires an exceptional framework to supplement the existing American regime, an extra legal agency to facilitate the secret coordination of the world's intelligence services, which in a way is another company, as many of you I assume know, Thiel founded around this time, Palantir, which is now getting hundreds of millions of dollars in government contracts. I don't even think J.D. Vance, his plant in the government, this is like Manchurian Candidate 2, as it were, has to say a word. And there's a whole iconography, of course, attached to Palantir and the neo-fascist attachment to 1980 Camp Hobbit in Italy. So there's another semi-deep dive that one could go down that I will resist. Topic for another paper. But it's all there and it's important. Undoubtedly, the most clairvoyant aspect of Thiel's disquisition, however, I'm still with this text from 2007, the Straussian moment, if you will. Bear with me just for another minute then. The most clairvoyant aspect was his plea for an American Caesar, a 21st century Augustus capable of restoring auctoritas and imperium in a democracy riven by factionalism and dissensus. In a stunning admission, and there's a lot to stun, Thiel avowed that, and I quote, for the Straussian, there can be no fundamental disagreement with Oswald Spengler's call for action in the dramatic finale of Untergang des Abendlandes. Not only is the title left in the original, which is fine with me, but to drive home his point, the German-born Thiel, as Frankfurter, ursprünglicherweise, the German-born Thiel invoked the ominous conclusion of Spengler's Meisterstück, which he quoted in the original German and left it as such. Esoteric writing, and that Spruch or Absatz follows, or two sentences davon. Für uns, die ein Schicksal in dieser Kultur und diesen Augenblick ihres Werdens gestellt hat, in welchem das Geld seiner letzten Siege feiert und seine Erbe, der Caesarismus, leise und unaufhaltsam naht, ist damit in einem eng umschriebenen Kreise die Richtung des Wollens und Mussens gegeben, ohne dass es sich nicht zu leben lohnt. End of Zitat. I assume that's the key word in there is the Caesarismus. Obviously, this is an important point of reference. In the context at hand, it's worth recalling a different Straussian moment, to stay with Thiel's title for a second, one that took place in May 1933, 2 months after the Nazi seizure of power. In a letter to Karl Rüvit, Strauss extolled genuine fascism in contrast to its ludicrous, Chaplin-esque doppelganger, that is, Hitler and his ilk. As Strauss remarked in the aforementioned missive to Rüvit, only from the principles of the right, Die Rechte, that is, from fascist, authoritarian, and imperial principles, is it possible to protest against the shabby abomination of Nazism, the pale imitation of real imperium and fascist power. I finish the quote from Strauss here. There is no reason to crawl to the cross of liberalism. As long as somewhere in the world there is a glimmer of the spark of Roman thought, as Romanità was being revived in Italy at the time. Strauss's allusion to contemporary traces of Roman thought was an unmistakable reference to fascist Italy's neo-Roman histrionics, Mussolini's fondness for the Roman salute, its obsession with militarism, the colonization of Africa, and so forth, all of which were encapsulated by the idea of Romanità. A parallel, as I will get to now, a parallel fascination with neo-Roman histrionics pervades the liberal right's ongoing search for an American Caesar, a quest that overlaps with contemporary neo-fascism's appropriation of the imagery of classical antiquity for the ends of white nationalism. And there's many aspects of this story I can't go into, maybe mercifully in full detail. This is a birthday party that Musk threw for himself in Venice, where the partygoers were outfitted in Roman dress, and Musk appeared. See, this is not a doctored internet image, unlike the one of Trump earlier. And I'm approaching, where am I time-wise? Well, I'm pretty far along, I guess. I only have another page. And as you see, es geht weiter. In a 2021 podcast, J.D. Vance, Thiel's political understudy, articulated a remarkably similar version of Caesarism as a necessary cure for the American Republic's moral dereliction and wavering resolve. Alluding to the demise of the Roman Republic in the 1st century BCE, Vance claimed that the United States was mired in a late Republican period in which the people don't have nearly enough power. The oligarchy, Vance continued, referencing Yarvin's cathedral, has seized most of it. If we're going to push back against it, we're going to have to get pretty wild, pretty far out there, and go in directions that a lot of conservatives right now are not comfortable with. In retrospect, Vance's chilling premonition, we're going to have to go get pretty wild and pretty far out there, seems to have presciently anticipated the second Trump administration's replacement of the Normenstaat with the Maßnahmenstaat, thereby substituting, in fact, a permanent Ausnahmezustand, to come back to Schmidt, for the provisos of limited government. In a June 2024 interview with the New York Times, Vance justified the need for an American Caesar by appealing to Carl Schmitt's Freund-Feind opposition. The thing that I keep thinking about liberalism, Vance asserted, is that these guys have all read Carl Schmitt. There's no law, there's just power. And the goal here is to get back in power. End of quote. Vance's political cynicism underlines the extent to which he has internalized the dark Enlightenment view of political liberalism as an ideological window dressing for a cabal of power-hungry leftists. His standpoint reprised Schmitt's neo-Machiavellian claims that values are non-existent, so whatever liberals tell you they believe in, they have convictions, they believe in Grundrechte, etc., is bullshit. It's just a cover. As Schmitt said, notably in concept of the political, der Menschenrechte sagt, betrügt. And then he writes in 1960, Tyrannei der Werte, right? Vance's claim that liberals consistently scorn law in favor of power is a classic case of Freudian projection. Post-liberals, such as Yarvin, Thiel, and Notre Dame political theorist Patrick Deneen, whose book Regime Changed furnished a roadmap for an anticipated right-wing seizure of power, had long abandoned the normative framework of liberal democracy, thereby reorienting the American right toward the machtpolitische obsessions of Schmidt and Spengler. As Yarvin, who, as we've seen, as I mentioned, urged Americans to surmount their dictator phobia, put it, the idea that you're going to be a Caesar with someone else's department of reality, this is the way these people think, department of reality, in operation, is just manifestly absurd. And you can, I say this succinctly, you can evolve or develop the entire campaign to suppress prominent universities, bastions of liberalism, or the liberal view of reality from this dictum. Not only this dictum by Yarvin. This is an incentive to develop that program, to implement that program. By claiming that America was undergoing a late Republican period, a time of unprecedented political turmoil that necessitated a transition to imperium, Vance merely voiced a political conclusion that, in the meantime, has metastasized into a right-wing commonplace. The time has come for an American Caesar, a political strongman, who could bring the left liberal dictatur, like you had here the Merkel dictatur for 12 years or whatever it was, to its needs. A leader who possesses potestas and imperium, power and authority, to suppress the impending civil war between red states and blue states. In recent years, the most vociferous advocate of American Caesarism has been former Claremont Institute senior fellow and current State Department honcho, Michael Anton. And in a nod to America's intractable red state, blue state political divide, Anton denominated his new political imperative literally the quest for a red Caesar. He explored this idea in a 2021 book, for example, The Stakes, America, the Point of No Return. He examines several worst-case scenarios, the prospect of a red state secession, an aggravation of the existing red state, blue state antagonism, culminating in civil war, or the possibility, there's been talk of that recently since recent developments in September, etc., or the possibility of a left-wing coup. I don't know where this possibility came up, as worth discussing, who's planning it, where it's but it's a necessary counterweight, obviously, to the idea of a red Caesar. So, as Anton says, I'll just be quick, this is my last paragraph here. And he claimed that for the past 50 years, the left has been engaged in a scorched earth campaign against, it's a long list, virtue, and I'm shortening it, virtue, morality, piety, liberty, industry, enterprise, thrift, decency, modesty, and courage, and I'll leave the rest out. A situation led him to conclude that a state of emergency already exists. Anton posited, again without any empirical proof or support, that since the left's deepest desire is to rule the right without consent or constraint, the current situation justifies on pragmatic grounds the advent of a red Caesar, a preemptive strike by the political right, which Anton portrays as the guardians, conversely, of virtue, morality, piety, etc., etc., to forestall an anticipated left-wing political takeover. Addressing the elephant in the room, really I'm at the end here, he says, he consoles us by saying the chances that a red Caesar will display the ideological zeal of a right-wing Pol Pot are nil. Well, time to rethink. At the same time, he acknowledges that the variety of Caesarism he envisions will not be all sweetness and light. As Anton blithely concedes, all despotisms are intolerant of challenges to their power. They tend to crush the first whiffs of rebellion, Political prisoners are not uncommon. Censorship, to one degree or another, is the rule. Empires are not conducive to liberty. And, you know, I have a citation from him that I'll skip that I call Orwellian. It could be compared with Philip Roth's prescient The Plot Against America, or, of course, Margaret Atwood's, to come back to my original theme of toxic masculinity and misogyny, The Handmaid's Tale. For what we're witnessing with the current Trump administration is a classic case of life imitating art of sorts. Thank you.
And these images are all from the images that you use of all these different Caesars.
They're contrivances from the internet. The first one I showed on there, you can buy it, and it's available on eBay and other websites, and you're supposed to pay hundreds of dollars for an image of Trump as an American Caesar. I didn't pay. But there's Neo-Romanism, of course. You must know here from the identitarians, the Neo-Spartanism too, and the illusions. There's a whole. These are stills from the assault on the Capitol, January 6, 2021, and they're wearing Spartan helmets. They perceive themselves as, the guardians, like Leonidas in 380 BC, of a new invasion, not necessarily from the Orient, but certainly in solidarity with Trump's anti-immigration policies, and so they're the new Spartans. This imagery is, of course, very widespread among the new right, not just in the U.S., but of course in Europe too, among the identitarians. You see it at demonstrations, the yellow and gold, and the lambda, the Greek L, as the symbol they use.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Richard, do you know if official U.S. government social media accounts are putting those kinds of images out there right now? They're already trolling and putting out memes all over the place, but I just thought the Red Caesar would be something that would be perfect for the kind of,
It might be too explicit, too, and it might backfire. But I've been proved wrong a lot. Things I never expected to see or take seriously. 2 minutes later, we appear. So I speak guardedly.
Stay tuned. Susan.
I have a conceptual question that I've been worrying about for a bit. What's the kind of, is there a clear distinction between a Caesar or an Augustus or any kind of dictator and a monarchy? I mean, I sort of know one is you have to one you inherit and one you don't. But I was recently reading the Hilary Mantel Wolf Hall trilogy, which is brilliant. And actually Henry VIII in that becomes pretty close to what we're seeing in the White House. And so I'm just wondering, is there a really clear distinction between a king and a Caesar, or not?
Interesting. It depends, I think, which monarchy you look at. These people really don't think historically.
A non-constitutional monarchy.
Yeah, but there is a point of reference here in this turgid and disturbing literature, which is that at one point, neo-reaction was known at one point, 18 years ago, Yarvin, as when he started writing his blog under the pseudonym Mencius Moldbug, Mencius for this society, he said monarchy sounds better than dictatorship, so he's going to call it a monarchy. So, these people really, it's American Geschichtlosigkeit, if I may say so. The references just kind of pop up and down, and it's very oriented toward kind of a postmodern redescription. Whatever sticks as a meme, throw it against the wall. Whatever catches on, whatever gets attention. So they
But apart from them, I mean, Trump is throwing around the woke Marxists, right? And nothing could make less sense than calling somebody a woke Marxist. Apart from their use of things, is there a conceptual difference between a monarch, a non-constitutional monarch, and a Caesar, or not?
Yeah, because basically, I mean, we can go to Schmidt's book of 1921. I mean, the age of legitimacy is vorbei, of legitimate monarchs, and we need a new source of authority. Especially, I have paper coming out on this. Whether you want or not, I'll send.
Please do.
On Schmidt's formation as the legal advisor to Hauptmann Christian Roth, who suppressed Schmidt was stationed in Munich during World War I and in 19 during the Räterepublik. And Schmidt was the legal counselor to Hauptmann Roth, Christian Roth, who suppressed bloodily, as we know, hundreds of deaths, probably between 500 and 600, in late May, early June 1919. This is nothing monarchical about it. There, of course, massacres that can occur, but these are usually during religious wars. So this is, I think, in terms of political forms, traditionally monarchy we would think has some restraint. Okay, there are estates. There are in French Parlement up to Louis XIV, really. This is really much more Schmittian, and hence the fascination with Schmidt that comes up again and again as a political figure, that there were no constraints on political rule. Yeah, on the sovereign.
Okay. I have a few people on my list, but I was just informed by Ben that the next speaker who's coming to us by Zoom doesn't have all too much time. So just keep your questions short so we can get as many as possible in before moving on to Federico Finkelstein. Okay, Mario, please go first.
Okay, I keep the question.
Would you sit down, please, because sometimes it gets in front of the camera.
Okay,
we can hear you just fine.
Okay,
yeah.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I keep my question short. It's about Carl Schmitt reading from the left, or used by ex-leftists. Recently, after many years, I read some copies of Telos, the American philosophical journal, which used to be very much on the new left, and then I learned that Russell Berman, the longtime editor, is now an open supporter of Trump, and I see similar, as you know, similar tendencies among a lot of AfD publications, particularly Tumult, which is also coming from the 68. How much focus American leftists, ex-leftists, particularly ex-Maoists, on Schmidt's Schmidt's ideas today?
Could you give it to?
Well, I'm actually a former editor of Telos, and I resigned when they became
I'm sorry.
a journal of Carl Schmitt studies back in the late 80s, not to date myself.
Okay.
But, there's another current of left Schmittianism, really, that has to do with Chantal Mouffe and the late Ernesto Laclau, but it's a topic that interests me, especially from Theory of the Partisan, where he talks about Mao is this weird celebration of Maoism that gets a lot of traction in the Italian left, and at least this wasn't one of my original theses, but I had the figure of Nazi Maoism as a prelude to Franco Freire, a prelude to the Anno di Piombi. Anyway, but we're keeping it short.
Herr Rosalinski-Lieber, please.
Yes. Yesterday, Jason Stanley was explaining that America is becoming fascist, you disagreed, and I disagree with him as well. But my question to you is, what is America becoming? If I understand you correctly, it is what, a kind of conservative capitalist, I don't know, what it, from your presentation I would understand it is a conservative revolution, a new conservative government, authoritarian government takes America and an authoritarian conservative movement, or how would you say it in a few words?
Well, this might not satisfy the Jason Stanleys of the world, with all due respect. I think the Spengler conservative revolutionary ideology is important for this, what I call dark enlightenment, Kulturpessimismus. That gives them the pretext. This is their diagnosis of American values and the West's values since the age of revolution in the 18th century. That gives them the license to institute repressive measures. The phrase I use 2/3 through, which is familiar to a German public, the substitution from Ernst Franklin, the substitution of the Normenstaat, rule of law, for the Maßnahmenstaat, I think comes close. Because the reason that fascism isn't going to work at the time being, may change tomorrow, is because we still have courts that are overturning Trump's various executive orders, of which there were in the first 3 months approximately 140, which is 4 times more than the same period of Obama's rule. So, I mean, you can project ahead here. You read the same newspapers that I do. So I don't think it's fascism. We have an election scheduled for another year, and if the Republicans lose, and who knows, it's a long time, if they lose the House of Representatives, the shoe will be on the other foot in terms of investigations, etc. Things could change awfully quickly. Trump, in principle, who knows, is out of office in 3 years. There's a lot of damage he can afflict. But I don't want to jump to any conclusions or engage in any alarmism. I think we have enough before us in a piecemeal, empirical, day-to-day fashion. He just indicted Letitia James yesterday, right? It's every day there's a new transgression of Rechtsstaatlichkeit. I think that's what we have to focus on now. And there's a beautiful piece that Otto Kirchheimer, who was a Schmidt student, right? And he wrote this amazing essay justifying a left-wing dictatorship. We only have a torso of it from, I think it's from 29 or 30. This was a temporary aberration for Kirchheimer. He wrote this wonderful essay. Toward the end was appreciating Rechtsstaatlichkeit, which someone who writes on left Schmittianism or Bolshevism as, it's this alternative, which Michael Anton took literally, but reverse it. Obviously, we need a right-wing dictatorship because the left is planning a dictatorship against us. So it's a preemptive coup. Well, there's no evidence for this, of course. But of course, in late Weimar, there's another sense in which the analogies become inappropriate, which someone like Roger Griffin is very helpful pointing out. There are crises and there are crises. This appreciation for Rechtsstaatlichkeit and rule of law, and it's just part of the story, the origin story of the Bundesrepublik too, with the Grundgesetz. I come here, I look at headlines, I look at, lyrical, but I see Christian Merz for the first time on TV talking about basic values, liberal values of the Rechtsstaat. This is why AfD doesn't come near us. This guy, whatever his limits are, I don't want to exaggerate his strengths, knows historically what he's talking about. I think a lot of Germans do. Not the taxi driver who drove me here 2 nights ago who thought the AfD, that Merz blew it when he took the SPD into the coalition rather than the AfD, at which point I tried to shoot him down, so to speak, pretty quickly. You've got these Russian drones circling all over, and you want to pact with the AfD that's pro-Putin, that's going to really go far. But, the historical sense that's been developed in the last 2 decades about the importance of the Rechtsstaat, etc., and you see the signs, the electoral sign, etc., about the importance of these. It's a historical learning process that, there's a lot of cynicism, obviously, in the U.S., and there's a dwindling number of persons and articulate intellectuals who can explain why something like an American Republic or the founding values, whatever they, as compromised as they might be, are worth preserving. And we also have, but this other theme, and I'll stop at that, is that the discourse of the left has become anti-civic, as Susan has said in one of her recent books, The Left is Not Woke. It's become anti-universalist. It's become very ghettoized, and it treats the Enlightenment as in the reverse image of this dark Enlightenment that I've been talking about. It demonizes the Enlightenment. So you're left without the intellectual, moral, and political resources to counteract what's happening when you take that position in many ways. So there's another story there that Susan actually tried to address, and a few other people, if anyone listens to that.
I'd love to let this conversation play out for another hour. The thing is, I would like to let Luisa Passerini ask the last question. I'm being cruel to Amber and Antonio, but in the interest of time, we have to cut it short. So, Luisa, the floor is yours.
This will be more a comment than a question, but I hope it will steer your comment. In my personal genealogy, there are 3 steps concerning this image. The first one is, of course, the original Caesar, and the second one is Mussolini, and the 1/3 one is here. Now, according to Marx, the first time one image appears in history, it is tragic, dramatic. The second time is farcical, but the farce and the tragedy are on the same level. And here, it seems to me that the farce is all over. It's completely farcical, but the tragedy, the cruelty, is coming out also very clearly. So this is just, my impression of this genealogy that you have evoked. And it seems that this image is very telling of this history of the image. And in fact, the question of a Caesar doesn't have limitations. A monarch does. A monarch may have many types of limitations. So, I want to thank you for this, for evoking this.
It's a new Sulla, to quote, dictator,
Join me in thanking Richard. Thank you.